It's my pleasure to give you Peter Wolfgang, who's the Executive Director of the Family Institute of Connecticut. He's a well-known speaker, a dear friend. He's a wonderful father as well. And it's my pleasure to give you Peter Wolfgang to talk about this very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Father. Thank you, St. Joseph. And St. Joseph's Parish, what a great crowd. It's been, I think, maybe 4 years since I spoke here last. Was anyone here when I spoke in, it must have been about 2008? Yeah, okay, so we have a mix here. We have folks who are maybe familiar with my organization as well as some new people here. As Brian said, my name is Peter Wolfgang. I'm the Executive Director of the Family Institute of Connecticut. Before I forget, I have a sign-up sheet over by the cups. If you're not already on our email list, please do sign up. We have packets of information, including packets of information about what I'm going to be discussing tonight. So if you're not already on our email list, please sign up. If you're not familiar with our organization, please do grab one of the packets. I mean, in short, we are Connecticut's pro-life, pro-family, pro-religious liberty organization. And these are the issues we fight for. We run alongside the Catholic Church. We're also an ecumenical organization. We work very closely with evangelical churches throughout Connecticut and some Jewish organizations as well. And that's the sort of thing that brings me here to speak to you before tonight, because what we're facing is really an attack on all of us, whether we're Catholic or non-Catholic. You know, I like to quote a line from Benjamin Franklin when he was when they were signing the Declaration of Independence and essentially breaking off from the British Crown and in the eyes of the Crown declaring treason. You know, Ben Franklin said, either we all hang together or we'll all hang separately. And I think a lot of folks understand this about this HHS mandate, what's at stake here, and why we all need to hang together. Because religious liberty, the values that this country was founded on, are under tremendous threat by the administration in this mandate. So I'm just going to grab water here because I tend to talk quickly. If I talk too quickly, just tell me and I'll slow down. But I think most of you are familiar with the healthcare, the Affordable Health Care Act that was passed a couple of years ago. It's known colloquially as Obamacare. And without getting too deep into the subject of Obamacare, what interests us for our purposes here tonight is something that was handed down just a couple months ago coming out of Obamacare. It was a mandate from the Health and Human Services Department. One of the things that is important to understand about Obamacare is that it gives tremendous power to whoever is Secretary of Health and Human Services. This is one of the departments of the administration, of the executive branch of our government. And the Secretary of Health and Human Services basically has the power in many cases to decide what Obamacare means, how it will be implemented, how it will be executed. And what HHS has decided 2 months ago is that Obamacare means that Catholic institutions, religious institutions, as well as those of us who are in secular lines of work as well, but for our purposes right now, that religious institutions will be mandated, will be required by the government to provide and pay for contraceptives, abortion-inducing drugs, and sterilizations of their employees, regardless of whether or not that violates their moral beliefs, which of course, in the Catholic faith, it does violate our moral beliefs. Now, of course, we all know there's been a raging conflict within the Catholic Church going back some 40 plus years about contraception and church teaching and the level of obedience or assent to church teaching. This is not about that. That's not the discussion that we're having tonight. What's important to understand about HHS mandate is that this is the federal government, the civil power, Caesar in biblical terms, reaching into the church and saying, you will obey this even though it violates your conscience, even though it runs contrary to your religious beliefs. I cannot emphasize enough how unprecedented this act is in the history of our country. And it's not only about the Catholic Church. I'll get to that in a moment. But it is important to understand, right, that we do have a history of anti-Catholicism in this country. This country was founded initially by Protestants, and Catholics were a minority in the country. And there was a history of anti-Catholicism in some times and places in American history. Some of you may be familiar with that. There was, in the year 1834, there was a series of burnings of convents in Boston, anti-Catholic riots, an Ursuline convent, the awful disclosures of Maria Monk, which was this forgery against the Catholic Church. Some of you may be familiar with this, that there were these convents that were burned in Boston in the 1830s. Or some of you may be familiar with something called the Blaine Amendments. Blaine was this anti-Catholic congressman in the 1800s that tried to pass an amendment into the federal Constitution to make it so that public monies could not go to Catholic schools. The Blaine Amendment actually failed at the federal level, but it was passed into many state constitutions. So there is a history of anti-Catholicism in the United States, but it's important to understand why this is completely different. I mean, as bad as that mob violence was in Boston in 1834, that's exactly what it was, mob violence. It was the government in Boston in the 1830s that stepped in and actually protected those convents when they came under attack. The Blaine Amendment was a terrible thing, but it never did pass in the U.S. Constitution, and it was only state action. In fact, there was another thing in Oregon early in the 20th century where they tried to ban Catholic education altogether. It was a citizen initiative, but it was the U.S. Supreme Court, it was the government that struck it down. So, there have been instances in the past of violence against Catholics, of action on the state level against Catholics. But the important thing to understand is even when it happens on the state level, that's just a portion of the United States. That's not the entire country. What's completely unprecedented here is that the federal government, for the first time in the 200 plus years since the Bill of Rights, since the First Amendment, is saying to the Catholic Church that we are being forced to provide and pay for something that contradicts our beliefs. And it's not just about the Catholic Church. It could be any organization. It could be a Jewish deli being asked to provide bacon. That's something that would violate their conscience. It could be a Muslim organization being asked to, outlawing the burqa, something like that. I mean, everyone understands that there would be outrage if this was done to that Jewish deli or to the Muslims with the burqa. But that's precisely what's happening now to Catholics with the HHS mandate. And this is why we do have allies who are non-Catholic. That's why it's not a Catholic issue, because I think everyone understands if the federal government has the power to do this to the Catholic Church, then it has the power to do it to any one of us, whether we're evangelical Protestant, mainline Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, Jewish, Muslim, Mormon, you name it. Once the federal government has the power to do this to the Catholic Church, then nobody's religious liberties are really safe. And if the First Amendment means anything, I mean, that's what liberty is. Liberty is kind of a different word than freedom. What liberty means specifically is the right not to be forced by the government to do something you don't want to do. That was the whole point of the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. I mean, the first clause of the First Amendment are our religious liberty freedoms. We've never, in the history of this country, we have never been forced to do what the federal government is now forcing us to do. And that's why we ought to have a proper sense of outrage. We ought to be alarmed at this. So that's one thing that we need to understand, is that this is not just the Catholic Church. This is religious liberty. It could be any one of us. It's important to understand that this is not about contraception. Now, I said, there's been a war inside the Catholic Church internally, amongst, within the family, over Humanae Vitae, over church teaching going back to the 1960s. That's not what this is about, because even those of us who are faithful to church teaching on contraception, none of us are trying to pass a law to ban contraception. All we are asking for here is that the federal government not force us to provide and pay for something that contradicts our beliefs. No one's trying to ban contraception. When the Catholic Church resists the dictates of the government, of the administration in this matter, it's being portrayed in the media as the Catholic Church or their political allies are trying to ban contraception. It's a war on women. This is just a complete falsehood. All we're asking is for the rights that we had in the entire history of this country up until just 2 months ago. That's all we're asking for here. No one is trying to ban contraception. So it's not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes and then I'll take questions at the end. So it's not about contraception. It's not about the Catholic Church. Those are two myths that we just need to put aside right away. And then we need to understand the seriousness of this mandate. As I said, this is something that the federal government has never done to us before. But there's a lot of different facets to it and why this is so alarming. The federal government here is redefining what a religious institution is. The government has never taken it on itself, the way it is doing here, to define what is and isn't a religious institution. The truth is, this HHS mandate actually does have an exemption for religious organizations. But listen to this. This is how they define religious organization. You qualify for the religious organization exemption in the HHS mandate if your religious organization hires only members of your own denomination and serves only members of your own denomination. So it would be, for instance, as if St. Francis Hospital in Hartford were to take all the Muslim and Jewish patients and atheist patients that it's serving right now, throw them out on the street, and hang up a sign in their employment office that says, Protestants need not apply. That is never the way the Catholic Church has operated in this country since its founding. It's never had to live under those restrictions. Whether it's Catholic charities, and it could be a hospital, it could be a school, it could be a soup kitchen, it could be a home for battered women. It's never been the case that the Catholic Church serves only other Catholics and employs only other Catholics. And it's not just us, it's the Salvation Army, you name it. That's never been the definition of religious institutions in our society. But now that's what the federal government is telling us. They're telling us that EWTN is not a religious institution, and Mother Angelica's nuns must be forced to pay for and provide contraception, or Focus on the Family, or Colorado Christian College, you name it, of any religion. The government is now deciding for us what is and isn't a religious institution. It's a tremendous, tremendous danger. Another thing that ought to really concern us here is that the federal government is redefining what healthcare is. We're now being told for the first time these last 2 months by the federal government that the federal government has decided that contraception is healthcare. Contraception and abortion-inducing drugs like EVA. It's something close to RU-486. It's not quite RU-486, but it's close. And you have to wonder, if the federal government can suddenly decide that contraception and sterilizations and abortion-inducing drugs are now healthcare, well, why not surgical abortions? Why not assisted suicide? Where does it stop? If the federal government has the ability to just declare these things to be, we're now going to call these health services, well then it will have the ability to mandate that our institutions and we as individuals in our secular lives as well, that we be required to provide and pay for these quote-unquote services. Finally, another point that I want to emphasize is that this HHS mandate has real teeth. I mean, there are a few crimes in the United States where the fines, the penalties that you'll pay for disobeying this are as high as it is with the HHS mandate. These organizations are going to be faced with a choice. And Cardinal George out in Chicago, the Archbishop of Chicago, has already said this explicitly, that within a couple years they may just have to close down all their schools, all their hospitals. These are the choices that they're going to be left with. They say Notre Dame, if Notre Dame does not comply with this HHS mandate, that they may have to pay fees to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a year. And the problem is with this is that they can close down the institutions, but in a way that's a victory too for the enemies of faith, isn't it? What they're trying to do is they're trying to take religious institutions and push them out of public life altogether, out of our common life. You know, Aristotle defined politics as the art of answering the question, how ought we to live together? And that word ought is necessarily moral. It's infused with moral questions. And religious institutions have always been a part of that discussion since the nation's founding, the Declaration of Independence, nature and nature's God. I mean, our whole system of government rests on those Judeo-Christian underpinnings. And what the present government is trying to do is push this religious influence out of the public square and make it something where, okay, you still have the right to worship in your churches and in your private homes, but that's all it is. It's some private hobby. It's not something that is allowed to have any public influence. This, by the way, is how religion was conducted in places like the Soviet Union. The churches were allowed to stay open. They just weren't allowed to proselytize or have any influence on public life. The hope being that, you know, after a few generations, all you have left are these babushkas, these old women lighting candles, and then a few more generations after that, they're not even there, and you've slowly killed off religion in society. Something like that is happening with the HHS mandate, if it's allowed to continue. Now, those are 5 key points that I've laid out that I think ought to be accessible to a general audience, no matter what your religious background. There's a 6th point I want to bring up for a specifically Catholic audience. I said that this is not about the Catholic Church. It's about the religious liberty of all of us, and it is. But it is about the Catholic Church, but it's not only about the Catholic Church. There is something that should concern us, especially as Catholics. The Obama administration put out this HHS mandate during the month of January 2012, about 2 months ago. And there was a furor, you all remember. And this went on for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then the administration came up with what it called an accommodation, which was really no accommodation at all. But we're not going to get too deep into the weeds on that. We can get into it during the Q&A. What I think really ought to interest us as Catholics is that when there was that initial backlash against the HHS mandate, and the Obama administration then moved to craft the so-called accommodation, they didn't talk to the bishops. They never spoke to our bishops. What they did was they spoke to a nun named Sister Carol Keehan, who is the head of something called the Catholic Health Association. It's an umbrella organization of Catholic health organizations in the country, hospitals, and so forth. She was instrumental in helping the president pass Obamacare a couple of years ago. She was an ally of his, and she was upset at the initial HHS mandate. So what the Obama administration did was they crafted, and look, this is nothing against women. I mean, women have done tremendous good inside the church. I just referenced Mother Angelica. There's Marianne Glendon out of Harvard, one of our great Catholic intellectual leading lights. This is not something against women, but we need to understand what happened here with Sister Carol Keehan. What the Obama administration did was they went to Sister Carol Keehan and they said, what would make you happy? We want to craft this to get you back on board. And she laid out some very basic conditions which they met. But it's not what the bishops wanted. And I think what really needs to concern us as Catholics is, what is the Obama administration doing deciding that Sister Carol Keehan is our Pope? The proper locus of authority inside the Catholic Church are the bishops and the Pope. I mean, that is the will of Christ for the Catholic Church. And it should concern us tremendously that, again, the civil power, Caesar, is stepping in, and instead of dealing with the legitimate voice of authority inside the Catholic Church, they're setting up some other voice for the Catholic Church and saying, no, Sister Carol Keehan speaks for the Catholic Church. Or it doesn't have to be her. The editors of America magazine, which is this liberal Jesuit weekly. You know, when some of the Obama administration staff finally did meet with some of the staff of the Catholic bishops, they lectured the bishops and said, well, you should listen to America magazine. They put out an editorial in our favor. Who made America magazine? The Pope of the Catholic Church in the United States, or Sister Carol Keehan. This should concern us greatly because this is unheard of in the history of the United States, but not in the history of the world. There's precedent for this. In fact, there's precedent for it in our own lifetime. If you're familiar with what's happening in China, China is a communist country, and they have what they call the Catholic Patriotic Church. They set up a government-run organization that mimics the Catholic Church. They claim this is the Catholic Church, and it's government-controlled, and it's not allowed to recognize the authority of the Pope. And there's another Catholic church that is the underground church there that is in communion with the Pope. Now, it's not that bad yet. We don't have a patriotic Catholic church in the United States of America, and God willing, we never will, a government-controlled church. But you can see incrementally, in a very soft way, how some sort of line has been crossed here, that we've just taken a little step in that direction for the civil government to take it upon itself, instead of dealing, when you deal with the Catholic Church, you deal with the Pope and you deal with the bishops. For the civil government to say, we're not going to deal with the bishops. We're going to decide for ourselves who will speak for the Catholics in the United States of America is unprecedented, unheard of. And we should all be outraged, and we should all stand with our bishops and the Pope and say, no, these are the men that are the successors to the apostles. They are the ones, they have always been the ones to speak for the Catholic Church for 2,000 years. That's something that should concern us greatly. So that is sort of a broad overview in the time allotted as to why this thing is so dangerous, this HHS mandate, this attack on religious liberty. And make no mistake, that is what this is. It is an attack on religious liberty. Not about contraception. No one's trying to ban contraception. And it's not just about the Catholic Church. It's an attack on the rights of all of us. So the question going forward is, what do we do about it? Well, that's where I take a glass of water. There's a few things. Again, I cannot emphasize enough, if you're not already on our list, sign up your name, grab one of our packets. Family Institute is going to be doing a lot on this. We've already done a lot on this, and we're going to be doing a lot more. There is a rally to be held this Friday, March 23rd, 12 o'clock noon, in front of the federal courthouse. That's the Ribicoff Courthouse in Hartford, 450 Main Street.
Main and Sheldon.
Sorry?
Main and Sheldon.
Main and Sheldon. Right on the corner of Main and Sheldon, 450 Main Street. We're going to have a national speaker there, Joe Scheidler. He's well known in the pro-life cause. I will be there as well. That's actually the second rally that we will have been involved in. We had one just a couple weeks ago. It's a steady drumbeat. It has to be repetitive. The other side continues to beat the drum for really a lot of falsehoods about what this is. So if we're going to get the truth out, and it is about education, it is about explaining to the public what this is all about. So if you can, come to our rally on March 23rd, 12 noon, 450 Main Street in Hartford, and you'll hear more about this. There is a thing that was voted down in the Senate a couple weeks ago called the Blunt Amendment. The Blunt Amendment would have ended this once and for all. There's going to be a modified version of the Blunt Amendment to be voted on soon in the U.S. House of Representatives, in our Congress. We have 5 congressmen from Connecticut. None of them have committed yet to vote for the Blunt Amendment. If you're on Family Institute's email list, we will be doing an email campaign to those 5 senators. We will be phone banking them. We will be going to their offices. This is a continual work. We're not going to win this overnight. This is going to go on for a few years. But we have to begin this now, and we have to really come charging out of the gate. Here in Connecticut, we've seen this sort of thing before. Who remembers SB 1098? That was the bill deliberately targeting the Catholic Church in 2009 and telling priests and bishops that they would no longer have financial authority over their own churches. Remember that?
Yes.
In the space of a few days, we had 5,000 people at the state capitol. The Catholic Church, the Diocese of Bridgeport in particular, and Family Institute running alongside them, we turned out 5,000 people in the space of a few days. We may be called upon to do things like that over the course of the next year or so. Things like that and things that exceed even that. Now is a time for heroism. I mean, don't be sad, don't be downcast. We were born for a moment like this. This is why God wants us here now. And, we're here today. We're here under the auspices of this church, under this roof, because our ancestors before us, they came to these shores and they carved out a niche for the Catholic Church and for religious liberty in general. All of our ancestors, Protestant, Catholic, they really handed us quite a birthright with the First Amendment. It's up to us now. Now's our moment to rise up and make sure that our grandchildren will continue to have that right. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much. There's a few things I want to say, though. We want to open it up for Q&A. You met Brian. Brian introduced me. We also have here Cal Anderson. And I think we have a few other attorneys here as well. Marcia's here somewhere. I like to call them the suits. You know, they're the practicing attorneys. I'm wearing a suit too. I'm an attorney. But depending on what your questions are, they can go a little deeper into the weeds on the mechanics of HHS. But that's sort of the broad overview of what we face. So we need to steel ourselves for battle and to take heart, to place ourselves in the loving hands of St. Joseph and to fight onward. Thank you.
Thank you.